We are in the third chapter of Ruth. So, Ruth, 4 chapters, one of the shortest books of the Bible. Obadiah, and I think Jude has 1, but as far as the Old Testament is concerned, Obadiah has 1. Got short books like Nahum, Haggai, Zephaniah. Jonah, I think, has 4 verses, 4 chapters, the same as Ruth, but it's a very short book. But it is packed with so much information. There is just so much, which is, I think, probably just as well, because Andrew last Sunday morning almost trespassed into chapter 3, and then in the evening, that man over there, David Kirkman, really got me worried, because he put 2 great big feet into chapter 3 and Ruth. But let me just say, if you didn't catch last Sunday morning and Sunday evening sermons, well, I would suggest you make every effort to get a copy. They were amazing. Okay, so let's start with the background, the prologue to Ruth. Chapter 1 sets the scene and puts Naomi in the starring role. This is a lady who has lost. She's gone to another country. She's lost her husband, her sons, and she's left with her 2 daughters-in-law. She returns to her homeland. All this tragedy to deal with. Chapter 2, well, that's more about Ruth. Her story starts unfolding. It's extraordinary for her. She is a widow. We assume relatively young. She is a Gentile on her own, apart from her mother-in-law, in a foreign land. And then, of course, you get to chapter 3. Chapter 3 brings all those 3 characters together. Naomi, Ruth, and now you've got Boaz. It's perhaps to us now a slightly strange story 3,000 years ago. And yet, many of the things we see here are quite common to us today. Ruth needs, and so does Naomi to some extent, Ruth needs a kinsman redeemer. She was married to Mahlon. Mahlon died. That's Naomi's son. If Ruth, who by this stage and with Mahlon had no children, if she has no children, the family name, Mahlon's name, dies with him. She needs a kinsman redeemer with whom she can have a child and a son. That will then carry on the family name. And indeed, I was just noticing in the Bibles that some of you may have, the church Bibles here, at the bottom, it's a wonderful definition of kinsman redeemer. It's a legal term for one who has an obligation to redeem a relative in serious difficulty. I don't think I could have put it any better than that. If she didn't get a kinsman redeemer, she would be reliant on charity for the rest of her life, or, as she was doing now, she'd be gleaning in a field for the rest of her life. That's hard work. So Naomi thinks she needs a kinsman redeemer. Now, a kinsman redeemer has to be somebody who is closely related to you, or in this case, the relative, Mahlon. Somebody who is so close to you, but also quite different, because there's no future for Ruth in finding a kinsman redeemer who is as poor as she is, because that's not going to lift her out of her poverty. So the kinsman redeemer has to be very close, but has to be very different. That's the heart of the message of Ruth, because the kinsman redeemer, the message here, is the foreshadow, of course, of our own kinsman redeemer. Someone who is as close to us as we can possibly have, but somebody who is totally different. And of course, you know who that is. Now, not financially and materially different, of course, but in this case, character. The Lord Jesus Christ was born just like we were. He wasn't conceived like we were, but he was born just like we were. He grew. He had eyes, he had ears, he had flesh, he had bones. He heard, he spoke, he could see, he could breathe. He was just like us, flesh and bone. But he was completely different in character, completely and utterly different to us. I was born on the 31st of August, 1958. My existence began, we would say, 9 months before that, or thereabouts. Jesus was also born, just like I was, just like we are. But his existence began, and I think Lamin said so earlier on, didn't he, in answer to a question? It didn't. Christ is eternal. So he is just like us. He's flesh and bone, but so completely different. And this is what Ruth is getting at, the book of Ruth. It's what this Old Testament book is all about. It prepares us for the coming of our Redeemer, the kinsman Redeemer. When he comes, we should be prepared for him. That's why we have Ruth. Now, there are other themes in Ruth, which I think it's right to touch upon. Other truths to take from the passage are the possibility here of a foreigner, a Moabite woman, coming into a foreign land and being faithful to the Lord in that land, and then being granted, as she was, full membership into Israel. It also teaches us equally that loyalty and covenant faithfulness in a foreigner can be a model for Israel's response to the Lord. One other thing, this book is extremely important in its history for establishing the legitimacy of David's kingship, because we know that Boaz was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. So, while this book does relate to a period around about 1,050 years before Christ, about the time when Samuel was around, it was almost certainly written a long time after that, because we see at the end of Ruth chapter 4 the genealogy. So let's go back to the text. Chapter 2 ends with Ruth gleaning in the fields with the other young women. And at that stage, she was living with Naomi. So let's just have a look at those first 5 verses again. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." Now Boaz, within whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. Ruth's response, "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. She has a very good relationship, of course, with Naomi. They've come through some tough times together, but they love and respect each other, quite obviously, and she heeds what her mum-in-law has said. Now, one thing I think just to say before we move on, I don't know, looking around, I think I'm probably speaking to most of you as a knowledgeable audience. Do you remember Blue Peter from the 60s or 70s. Some of you are thinking, what on earth is he talking about? I think Blue Peter is still on though, isn't it? Well, when I used to watch it, there were 3, maybe 4 presenters who come to mind, and one was a poor chap called John Noakes. Whilst Valerie Singleton and I think it was Peter Purvis were sitting in the studio, warm and comfortable, messing around with fairy liquid bottles and trying to make things, you usually had John Noakes climbing 100-foot chimneys on the outside with ladders and very little security, or he was being put on the back of a camel or an elephant or something very, very dangerous. And after that little article was complete and they showed you the footage, a voice, or indeed John himself might say, or one of the other presenters would say, children, don't try this at home. Do not try this yourself. Whilst we look at Ruth's story here, you might be able to see where this is going. She goes along to what is effectively a party. Naomi is thinking of her daughter-in-law here. She's planning. She's too old to marry, but she doesn't want Ruth to spend the rest of her life going up and down the fields, gleaning and being dependent upon charity. Let me see if I can find some solution, some rest for you, she says. Naomi has one thing and one thing only in mind: marriage for Ruth. She's planning, but she's planning in a very, very moral way. She doesn't want to see Ruth struggling for the rest of her life in this situation, in a land which is foreign to her, people around her who she hardly knows. It's interesting, actually, to contrast this story with, I don't know if you can remember, chapter 19 of Genesis, where you have the shameful behavior of Lot's 2 daughters who do something entirely different to try and pursue, as it were, expand the family name. This, from Naomi's point of view and from Ruth's point of view, is virtuous and at the time culturally moral and acceptable. There is nothing wrong with this at all. Of course, Naomi also wishes to see her son's name preserved, but she also wants this security in marriage for Ruth. Now, just in passing, it's interesting that the word security is used here because the word rest and security both used, because marriage, perhaps a very controversial point really to touch upon, but marriage should be a place where women are safe. Sadly, in my job, I see so many relationships where women are not safe. It might seem old-fashioned now, even sexist to say such a thing today. But marriage should be a place of safety and security, which is why it's so important, as we say in the Christian church, to be very careful about the choice that you make. So Naomi has Ruth's interests at heart. There's no question about that. Interestingly, we actually know very little about Boaz. We know he was the son of Salmon. He lived near Bethlehem. He was obviously still single, but we don't know his age. We know very little of his family background other than his father from the genealogy. We can imagine, I assume, because he owned a fair bit of land, or his family did, which they farmed, that he was relatively wealthy. But we know very little else about him. He just appears on the scene in chapter 2 and then here in chapter 3. Naomi reminds Ruth that Boaz is a close relative. And what she's saying to him, which we may not understand in this day and age, is that he has a duty to Ruth. What we can see as the chapter unfolds, however, is Boaz knows this. Perhaps Ruth already is shining a light for him. But as this chapter unfolds, we'll probably be concluding that he has already, while she's been in the field gleaning, been shining a light for her. Naomi's advice is very clear. Not so different for today. If you read on, go and have a shower, have a wash, put on some perfume, dress nicely, make yourself as attractive as you can. This really is matchmaking at the most extreme. Now, Boaz, up until now, has been busy for weeks and months getting in the harvest. He has no doubt seen, we know, Ruth, but his mind has been occupied with getting in the harvest. Now, the harvest is in, and they have these few other jobs to do on the threshing floor where they separate the corn out from the head, and they winnow, which is when you just throw all the corn up and let the wind take away the chaff and the husk. And after all that's done, a bit like our harvest festival, they have a party. Different time of the year. This would have been late spring because of the difference in climate, but it's a bit like that. Everybody's enjoying good food and drink. The next passage, I think, requires a bit of explanation. Interestingly enough, again, thanks to Laman, I think he mentioned about the way that people sleep differently in other lands, warmer lands perhaps, less wealthy. We might need to understand that in some of those lands, particularly in Middle Eastern lands, and still today in Middle East and Asia, where families might have lots of visitors or people might be passing and call in, they will very often, literally, grab a blanket, might be their own, and sleep on the floor. Remember Lamel said, it will just be on a table or a floor. Well, that's what's happened here. They've all had a party, and what Naomi is saying here is keep an eye out for where Boaz is sleeping, because it's going to be pitch black. There's not going to be, well, there might be the odd candle, but there's not going to be any street lighting or artificial lighting here. Everybody will celebrate, and when it's over, many of them will just, for want of a better expression in this modern age, crash out on the floor. They will cover themselves up, and you will not be able to see who is who. So, there they are, on the floor. Ruth remembers where Boaz lies down. It is important for her to remember that because of what she is about to do. So, at the end of the night, Boaz has had a bit to drink. There's no suggestion he's drunk, but he's certainly happy. It's a good time. The harvest is in. Make no mistake about it. The advice that Naomi gives to Ruth and what Ruth does is not reprehensible. It is perfectly morally acceptable. Although, with that warning again, don't try this at home to young ladies. If you look at Hosea, which some of you may be reading, there is reference in Hosea in chapter 9 to the threshing floor, where immoral behavior is frequently seen, but not here. So, what does Ruth do? She follows Naomi's instructions. She lifts the blanket over his feet and effectively uses his feet as a pillow. Now, that's a strange thing to happen. And it's not surprising that Boaz wakes up. It's late. And when he wakes up, Ruth gets straight to the point. He says, "Who are you?" These are godly people, remember, so there's no immorality here. And Ruth gets straight to it. "I am your servant Ruth. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Shall I put that in other language? What Ruth is saying is, take me as your wife, if you will. Now, this is God's plan. These are two Gentile, I say two Gentile women. You've got Naomi, who's not, but you've got Ruth, who is. The other Gentile woman who is also involved in the genealogy of Christ, of course, is Rahab. And both of them have made decisions. We could see this as all coincidence. But this is the providence of God, because God works through Christians who take initiative. You could just say at times, well, why should we do anything because God's in charge? Well, ask Jane and Lamel that. They have had put on their heart a great need, a calling to work in Sierra Leone amongst non-Christians. Naomi and Ruth have been called, as it were, to take up the initiative. And Ruth takes up the initiative here after Naomi's instructions. How does Boaz react? It could have all gone so wrong, couldn't it? He could have said, "What are you doing? Just go away." But no, even in his sort of stupor, when he wakes up from deep sleep, he says something which must have been music to her ears. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." But there's a but. There is somebody who is closer. Can you imagine what was going through Ruth's heart at that stage? Sudden joy, and then he tells her, actually, there is somebody who's closer. I'll need to speak to him. Oh, that must have been a difficult time for Ruth. Nevertheless, she doesn't react badly. She does what he tells her, lie down. Boaz then sleeps until the morning. Ruth doesn't. She lies there, probably wondering what on earth is going to happen to her. She lays there until the morning, in the dark. But Boaz has something on his mind. He wants to avoid, of course, any unhealthy gossip. So he has to ensure that she leaves before it is light. But she doesn't leave empty-handed. You remember, I think, in chapter 2, anybody remember the amount of barley or grain he gave Ruth in chapter 2? No? An ephah. This time he gives her not 6 ephahs, but 6, very similar to an ephah, 6 measures of barley. Anybody want to come out? There are youngsters still here, aren't there? Anybody want to come up and try and lift this? No. Let's have a look. Johnny, not well? Would you like to come and lift this up? No? Oh, it's very serious. It's not heavy. Must be you then.
Oh dear. That's quite a lot.
Thank you. That is 16 kilograms. An ephah was somewhere between 16 and 22 kilograms. Thank you, Joel. This is heavy, not even as heavy, and forgive me for being sexist, Ruth, well, 3,000 years ago, I'm not sure that would have been an easy carry. He says, "Give me your shawl," and he gives her a huge amount of grain, enough, we think, for food for 10 days. Because 1/10 of an ephah was effectively the manna, the weight that the manna was for one person when the Israelites were in Sinai. He also had thoughts, of course, for Naomi. He knows where Ruth is living. He knows about the background. I think it is clear that Boaz had been thinking about Ruth for some considerable time. This scene is pure. Neither Boaz nor Ruth behaved improperly despite the situation. And even in the morning, He has her reputation in mind. He wants to make sure that she leaves without anybody seeing her. And he even says, doesn't he, to those workers who are awake, do not gossip. Do not say anything about the woman. Her reputation to him is very important. Do not gossip. So Ruth goes home. She goes home to Naomi. She's got all this grain. And what do you think Naomi had been doing all night? Probably, if she slept at all, she would have been thinking about how this was going to go. She would have been there so anxious to ascertain what happened. Can you imagine as the front door opens, probably still dark in the early hours of the morning? How did you get on? Probably without even a second of Ruth being inside. She is so anxious. Well, Naomi must have been pleased when Ruth told her all that Boaz had said. Save and except, of course, for this one caveat. There is somebody who is closer than Boaz. And Christian life can be like that, can't it? It's not all plain sailing. Sometimes we do need to take the initiative, and sometimes we need to wait and trust on God. And it's wonderful how this chapter ends with Naomi's words. Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. They already know that Boaz is a wonderful man, a man upon whom they can rely. He is not going to leave this matter for more than 24 hours. That very day he will find out what Andy will tell us a little more about next Sunday as he goes into chapter 4. But for now, we leave the characters waiting upon God's providence. Amen.